Hello, my name is Jenna Goddard, and I'm the Writing Center Coordinator at Thompson University. Today, I'm going to chat about study strategies for university students. I'd first like to acknowledge that Thompson University is situated on the traditional lands of the Tecumloops to Secwepemc within Secwepemcúlecw. I also like to share a little bit about myself when I give a presentation. So again, my name is Jenna Goddard. I've been teaching at Thompson University for about 12 years. I love teaching STSS courses, so study skills, health and wellness, communication, and I love anything to do with the outdoors, particularly mountain biking and mountaineering. So today, I'm going to start off by talking about some academic supports available to students for effective study strategies. I'll start off by talking about memory and learning. I'll chat about visualization, how to stay focused. I'll introduce some tools like flashcards and cue cards. And then I'll introduce a video about the 6 most effective study techniques for students, and then share some study hacks for you. So I always like to start off by chatting about some of the academic supports available to students, and in this case, in terms of effective study strategies. You can book a counseling appointment because counselors can provide feedback for academic support. You can book an appointment with a peer academic coach, and I'll chat a little bit more about this service on the next slide. You can be connected to Early Alert. You can take STSS 1030, which is my own course on study strategies. You can be connected with accessibility services or supplemental learning. So peer academic coaches, these are actually supplemental learning leaders who can meet with you one-on-one. And students often come to university without maybe knowing how to manage their time or knowing how to study or know how to take tests. And then they encounter these things and feel kind of overwhelmed. So if this sounds familiar, I really encourage you to connect with a peer academic coach because they can listen to your personal challenges and then provide feedback on some of these issues associated with being a student. So if you connect with the Writing Center, either check out our website or send us an email, we can give you a little bit more information about booking one of these appointments. So as an art student myself, I always kind of imagined creating memories like, I don't know, putting something in a storage box in my brain. And it turns out this is not how memories are stored or created. So a good way of remembering how we create new memories is neurons which fire together, wire together. And you might remember that from your biology textbook in high school. But creating a new memory is a process where the neurons are firing and you're creating new pathways. So learning something new creates more connections. And things like practice and repetition builds a stronger connection. So it's these synapses firing in the same way again and again through practice and repetition, and that's what creates the memory. So the more active your learning is, the easier it is to recall something. And I'll be sharing some strategies for making your learning more active throughout this presentation. So when I give this presentation in a face-to-face setting, I bring out my tray of random objects. Typically, I clean my desk out, and then I set it in front of students, and I ask them to study the objects for 1 minute and try and remember as many objects as they see. So I'm not going to do that because this is not face-to-face, but I'll walk you through why I do this. You might have played this game at the latest 5-year-old birthday party that you attended. Okay, so what is the point in this game? What it does is that it kind of shows students how they remember and how they might remember more effectively. So my first point is retracing the path. Typically, after students have studied the objects on the tray for a minute, they go back to their seats and then they write down as many as they can remember. And so I often encourage those who remember a lot of objects to share their strategy. And some students indicate that they just repeat over and over again, scissors, ruler, pen, apple, scissors, ruler, pen, apple. And then the more they repeat it, the easier it is to remember. So some students go with this technique. That's retracing the path. So obviously the more often you recall something or repeat something, the easier it is to remember. The second strategy is grouping information. So some students take a look at the tray and they might start categorizing information. So for example, there's a green pen, there's a green ruler, there's a green, I don't know, is that a diary? There might be a green diary. And then it's easier for them to remember all the objects according to the categorization. Or they might remember that there's an apple and some sort of granola bar, it looks like, and maybe, I'm not sure, it's a kid snack, I'm not familiar with it, but it's another snack, and they can categorize that way. So when you group information, it's much easier to remember if you can associate it, whether it's color or whether it's use or, some other kind of category. Reviewing quickly and immediately. So there's kind of this magical time period in which to review new. One thing away from this presentation, I hope it's this. If you review newly learned information within that 24-hour period, you will be able to recall it so much more easily. So that means you take notes in a class and, that night before you go to bed or when you get up the next morning, go over those notes. If you don't do this, you can lose a significant amount of the new information. So when you go and study those notes weeks later before your midterm, you actually have to relearn the information. So if you review quickly and immediately, so within that 24-hour time period, you'll find that the information is there because you have made that pathway or that connection in your brain a lot stronger by reviewing. The fourth point is taking control. And this means, again, making your learning as active as possible. So pay attention. And, during this activity, sometimes students will actually physically pick up the objects and they always remember those ones that they touch or that they, actively engage with. So categorize the information. I've had some students kind of create a story or a narrative around all the objects on the tray. And that's another really great way of remembering information. The most important thing is make connections, whatever that looks like. So I sometimes get students who come to me and say, listen, I go to class with the best intentions and then I am just constantly distracted, particularly if they're in a class that might not be their first choice or, might just be a requirement for their degree or it might be, for example, study skills, nobody's favorite subject but mine. So what can you do when you might not be particularly interested in decrease those distractions. And this probably means put your phone away and turn off your phone. And I get these horrified looks from students when I suggest that, but honestly, it will make your learning experience so much better. So in the first point, I say decrease distractions or deal with it. So sometimes you might actually have to take care of certain things in order to be able to focus. So maybe, I don't know, you have to pay a parking ticket or call your mom or whatever it is. So either get rid of those distractions if you can, put them aside, or deal with them so that you can come back and focus. Relate it to your goals. Again, I'm going to use my own class as an example. You might sign up for a study skills class. Again, might not be your favorite or your first choice, but relate it to what you want. Maybe you want to learn some strategies so that you can increase your GPA, so that you can get that scholarship, so that you can, graduate with honors and, I don't know, get the career that you want. And I realize that I just made a huge leap from taking STSS 1030 to getting the career you want, but I'll leave it at that. Force yourself to ask questions. So again, make your learning active. If you are asking questions about the material, you are more likely to remember it and be interested in it. So, if you're not the kind of student who feels comfortable putting their hand up in class and asking questions out loud, then even just come up with questions in your mind, write them down on your page because you're forcing yourself to think critically about the material. The next point is bringing attention to your body or your body to attention. And this is kind of a mindfulness technique. So again, if you find yourself, looking out the window or looking at your phone, try to be in the moment, be present, focus on where your body physically is in the classroom. Think about, listening to the instructor, your eyes are on the instructor. And I always encourage students to sit in what's called the learning T. So sit up front if you can, or sit along the center. And it's really useful for a couple of reasons. One, you will find yourself focusing a lot more easily because you have fewer distractions around you. And two, you'll actually engage more with the instructor. If you're in the first row, you're probably making more eye contact. The instructor probably will remember you a little bit better, and that has its benefits. I also suggest to students who are finding that they have a hard time focusing to try a concentration cheat sheet. So you've probably heard of the idea that if you track information, it will grow. So for example, if you track your exercise, you'll probably find that you exercise more. If you track what you eat, you'll probably eat more healthily, because when you have information and you have more control over it. It is the same with focus and concentration. So I recommend to students that they have a tally on the top corner of their page where they're taking notes. Every time you find yourself losing focus or losing concentration, make a mark at the top of your page. And soon you'll notice that the number of marks at the top of your page decrease, because you'll have awareness around how often you're distracted. You'll try to get rid of those distractions, and you will get better at focusing. My final point is around knowing when to get help. So if you are trying all these strategies, you're finding that you are still unable to focus, it might be time to book an appointment, maybe with a counselor or with a doctor. So flashcards and question cards, or cue cards, are a couple really effective study strategies that I like to talk to students about. If you are a student in university, I really hope that by now you've heard of Quizlet, which is just a fantastic online flashcard app. It's really great because not only can you make your own flashcards, but you can actually tap into flashcards that other people have created. So if you are pressed for time but are looking for a way to review information, then you can often find flashcards that are already created for the topic that you're learning or the course that you're taking. And it's also handy because you probably have your phone on you right now. And it's great because if you are waiting in line for a coffee at Starbucks, or waiting for a bus, which in Kamloops can just take a really long time sometimes, then you have this kind of wasted time that you can utilize effectively. So you can pull out your phone, you can bring up Quizlet, and you can start reviewing some information, in these time periods that you might otherwise just be scrolling through Instagram. Cue cards are a little bit different from your average flashcard. So typically with flashcards, you have, maybe the term that you're trying to remember on the front and then the answer on the back. So these are different because they have a question on one side and then a question on the other that answers that question. So sounds a little bit confusing. It's supposed to be, because your brain is supposed to work harder when creating these. So maybe the easiest way to explain it is through an example. So on one side of the card, there might be, what is a call number? On the other side of the card, instead of having the answer, like the address on the spine of a book in a library, you would have, how can I find a book in the library? Because the answer is contained in that question. So why this is such an effective tool is because it's drawing on not only your lower order thinking skills, but also higher order thinking skills. You have to work harder to create these cards. Therefore, you remember the information a lot better. These cards also engage your visual and your auditory and your kinesthetic learning, because you are actually physically looking at the cards, you're flipping them over. I really encourage you to talk to yourself when you're going through these cards. Say the information out loud, because then you're engaging your auditory learning. I also encourage students to walk around and just look at that kind of tactile, you're feeling the cards, you're flipping them, you're walking around as you're saying them out loud. All that will help you become a more active learner and will help you remember. I also encourage students to have two stacks, an active stack and a review stack. So the active stack is the cards that you are currently trying to learn. So new information, new concepts, tuck those into your backpack or in your purse or in your pocket. So again, when you are maybe waiting for that coffee or for that bus, you can just pull it out and review the information. You have a review stack, and that's information that you have already learned, but you keep them, available so you can pull them out once a week or once every 2 weeks, and you can review the information before that important midterm or final exam. So I'm going to share a really great video. The Learning Scientists have an excellent website with just fantastic study tips for students. And I really encourage you to try one of these out or try them all out. But remember that the most effective study strategy is practice testing. And that's really useful if you have, a study group where you can divide the material up and then come up with questions that you think might be on the exam. So it's not about reviewing all of the material. You're thinking more strategically about what is the most important, what is the most relevant, what do you think will be on the exam. So I want to take a minute to really emphasize why these study strategies are so effective. Students often tell me that they study by rereading their notes and rereading their textbook. And when I was a university undergraduate student, I did this too. But it's actually quite time-consuming and it is not effective. Yet students overwhelmingly tell me that this is how they study. And I think that they do it for these reasons. It's so common because it feels as if you are learning something. So you reread your notes, you do it a second time, you do it a third time. It feels as if it gets easier. And so we trick ourselves into thinking, I am learning something. But you're basically glancing at your page and reminding yourself of the information on it. It's not effective because typically when you get to the exam, you can't refer to your notes unless it's an open book test. So in contrast, some of these strategies feel a lot harder, and so students kind of resist doing them. But again, tell yourself that if your brain is having a hard time, if it feels difficult, that's a good thing. It means you are making your learning active. I'm going to introduce a few study hacks for you in addition to the 6 effective study strategies you just learned. So again, connecting new information with information that you have already learned or are learning in another class is really effective. So always try to connect it with something that you're learning, maybe in the lab or maybe in your part-time job, because again, you're not establishing new connections in your brain. You're simply linking it to an already established connection. That's going to make your learning a lot more easy. So you just learned about the switching technique where you are forcing your brain to work a little bit harder by switching topics when you're studying. And that's great. That's a good study technique. But I encourage you to group similar kinds of tasks. So if you're not studying, if you're perhaps working on a project or writing an essay, do those kinds of assignments together because that actually helps your brain. In these cases, you don't want your brain to be working overtime. You want to give it a little bit of a break by working on the same kinds of tasks. Again, and I can't emphasize this one enough, decrease distractions, whether it's your phone, whether if you're like me and you pull up Google Chrome and you have about 20 tabs open, just get rid of those. Focus on one thing at a time. If you like listening to music, I encourage you to use music that does not have lyrics because that is distracting and part of your brain is trying to make sense of those lyrics, even if it's unconscious. And it's the same with having TV on in the background. So just minimize the distractions that you have around you. Another one is picking your environment. So again, by now, you probably understand where you work best. You might be the kind of person who needs to have silence around you. So then don't study in a coffee shop. Study at home or study in a library. Whatever you do, don't study in bed. It's pretty negative for 2 reasons. And you've probably already encountered this. So you have your biology textbook with the 3 chapters that you have to read before your next class. You get into your nice, comfy bed and you're like, all right, here I go. 5 minutes later, you are snoring. That's because you typically sleep in your bed. And so your brain gets sent a message when you crawl into your bed that, hey, it's time to go to sleep. Plus your bed is super comfortable, so you end up falling asleep. So you're not going to be able to study effectively there, but it will also start to negatively impact your sleep patterns at night. So you'll crawl into bed at night, you're going to want to get your 8 hours to be really refreshed for the next day, and if you've been studying in your bed, then your brain starts to get confused. It's like, well, what are we doing? Are we sleeping? Are we studying? I don't know, but I'm going to wake up so I can figure it out. So again, you're sending contradictory messages. So just take it from me, don't study in bed. I encourage students to think out loud. So walk around your room, talk to yourself or talk to a classmate, talk to a roommate. The more you articulate your learning, the easier it is to recall. And move around as well. So again, go for a walk, or walk around your room, walk around the campus. Again, really helps your learning. I encourage students to form a study group because it's really great for understanding maybe some of the topics that you have a hard time wrapping your head around. It also holds you accountable. So again, easy for us to let ourselves down. It's less easy for us to let others down. So if you have a study group, you're more accountable. They might be able to explain material to you that you don't understand. You will be able to reinforce concepts by explaining material to them. And it's really great for studying for a test. Again, you can divide up the material, you can create practice questions, and then quiz each other. My last point, I'm going to say it, even though I know that you're probably going to do this anyway, because every student does it. Don't cram the night before. It actually just increases your stress, and you're not going to learn anything new. So really try to do spaced practice where, again, you're having those shorter, spaced out study sessions instead of cramming the night before. I always like to end these presentations with a quote, and I really like this one by Robert Collier, which is, "Success is the sum of small efforts repeated day in and day out." Take pressure off yourself. You're not going to meet with success immediately. It requires effort, it requires time, and you can always try again tomorrow. Thanks for watching, and feel free to check out my other videos on writing and studying.